5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, welcome to the Joint Board of Fisheries and Board of Game Committee meeting. My name is Mackenzie Mitchell and I'll be chairing this committee meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order. The time is 2:02 p.m. and it is Tuesday, December 20th, 2022. We have 5 committee members present today, 2 Board of Fish members and 3 Board of Game members, as well as Board of Fish Chair Marit Carlson Van Dort, who will be filling in the vacant seat for the Board of Fish side. At this time, I'd like to have the board members introduce themselves by stating which board they serve on and where they reside. And we'll start with you, Jerry Burnett.
This is Jerry Burnett, Board of Game, Juneau.
Thank you. Al?
Thank you. My name's Al.
Al, we're having trouble here.
I'm from Fairbanks, Board of Game.
Oh,
can you hear me now?
Yeah, it was just a little bit of a delay, Al.
Oh.
Now you're muted.
Al Barrett from Fairbanks, the Board of Game. No, I'm not.
Yeah, we're having this like a delay by a few seconds. Maybe board support staff can just check that out for you. Maybe you could go in the other breakout room just during this introductory part of the meeting. And then Chair Mitchell, you could continue with the introductions if that's all right.
Thank you. Lynn Kehoe.
Thank you, Lynn Kehoe, Board of Game, Wasilla.
Excellent. And from our Board of Fish members, Tom Carpenter.
Tom Carpenter, Alaska Board of Fisheries. I reside in Cordova.
Marit Carlson Van Dort.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon. Marit Carlson Van Dort, Board of Fisheries, Anchorage.
Excellent. And as stated before, Mackenzie Mitchell, Board of Fisheries, and I'm in Fairbanks. We have some agency staff that have joined us today. We'll go ahead and do introductions to them. Commissioner.
Douglas DeLine, Commissioner, Department of Fish and Game, Anchorage.
Excellent. And some board support staff.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Christy Tibbles with Board Support Section. I'm the Executive Director for the Board of Game based in Juneau, and online with us are Art Nelson, Board of Fisheries Executive Director. We have 3 board support staff assisting us, Annie Bartholomew, Henry, Leisha, and Kyle Campbell.
Thank you for that board support. Subsistence section.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lisa Olson with Subsistence in Anchorage.
Thank you, Lisa. The Department of Law.
Good afternoon. This is Cheryl Brooking with the Department of Law in Anchorage. I believe that Erin Peterson is online, but I will be here to answer any questions for you today. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Division of Wildlife.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ryan Scott with the Division of Wildlife Conservation down in Juneau.
Thank you for joining us. Division of Commercial Fisheries.
Good afternoon, I'm Sam Raybung, Director of Division of Commercial Fisheries.
I'm Forrest Bowers, Deputy Director, Division of Commercial Fisheries in Juneau.
And Division of Sport Fish.
Yeah, I'm Dave Retz with Division of Sport Fish, and we also have Tom Tobby online as Deputy Director.
Very good, thank you very much. We also have George Pappas with the Office of Subsistence Management who will be listening in as well. Is there any other folks that might have been missed in introductions?
We do have Shalene Hutter with Division of Commercial Fisheries online too.
Hello there, everybody. I'm in Juneau. I'm the Regulations Coordinator.
Excellent. Thank you, Shalene. Anyone else? Okay, well, that brings us to the purpose of this meeting. The purpose of the Joint Board Committee meeting is to discuss. I'm going to ask everybody to go ahead and mute themselves. Right. The purpose of the joint board committee meeting is to discuss and make recommendation to the full boards for holding a joint board meeting in 2024. For anyone listening who is not familiar with the process for calling a joint board meeting, the process is described in statute AS 16.05.315, that a meeting can be called by the commissioner or a board to resolve any conflicts and regulations of the boards. The last joint board meeting was held in March of 2019. At that meeting, the joint board agreed to a schedule for scheduling joint board meetings approximately every 5 years, which would be in 2024. The meeting is open to the public via live video and audio stream on the board's website. The audio will also be posted online after the meeting for those who are unable to listen live. Before we start, there's a couple housekeeping and process items to cover. I'd like to ask board members and staff to please try and stay muted when not speaking, and then to remember to take themselves off mute when needed. It's also helpful for board members and staff who are speaking to have their video cameras on if you can. However, there are some of us with bandwidth limitations that are unable to use the cameras. If you need to speak, I encourage you to use the Zoom's hand raise feature, and Christy and Art will help to watch for anyone who wants to speak. You can also just raise your hand if you find that you aren't being called upon. On our agenda today is to develop a recommendation to the boards for holding a joint board meeting that includes the timeframe and process for issuing a call for proposals. The material we have for the meeting is the agenda and a memo prepared by the Department of Fish and Game, which provides background information about joint board meetings. Board support staff solicited public comment and AC comment, but we did not receive any. Are there any questions from committee members about the agenda before we move on? Seeing none at this time, I'd like to ask Christy Tibbles with board support to go over the information and Lisa Olson to address the subsistence section related to the subsistence regulations.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. I thought I would begin with the memo. I would begin by walking the committee members through the memo that you had mentioned. It's dated December 16th. I was going to cover just some of the information about the joint board meeting, the authorities with regards to the advisory committees and the process for adopting regulations, and then a little bit about the history of joint board meetings and the budget. And then I would turn it over to Lisa Olson to cover the topic of subsistence regulations and non-subsistence areas. And then following that, we would then jump back and forth. So that's one reason I mentioned a little bit of jumping back and forth on this memo. Then we would discuss or go over the call for proposals and the scope of the meeting and the timing. If that's good with everybody, I'll go ahead and proceed. I'm just going down that memo, which provides the background information for scheduling a joint board meeting. And as you had mentioned, the timeline for the next joint board meeting is slated for 2024, and that we are basing that on that past joint board action from the March 2019 meeting, when that joint board agreed that it would be good to have regulatory meetings every 5 years to consider those regulations dealing with advisory committees and the process for adopting regulations, and then every 10 years for addressing subsistence regulations. And at that time in 2019, the reason they wanted to do every 10 years for the non-subsistence topics is because it coincided with the update of the decennial census updates that occur every 10 years. So as the committee listens to the information and discusses the plan, discusses some planning for the joint board meeting, we do want to point out that conducting a joint board regulatory meeting is a large undertaking for the boards, the advisory committees, and the department. Joint board meetings require a significant workload for the subsistence section when addressing any proposed changes to the non-subsistence areas, as it requires compilation and analysis of considerable socioeconomic information to provide the boards. And then the workload for board support, of course, is impacted. We will provide the joint board with the analysis and staff comments for any advisory committee proposals and those to change the regulatory process. We're also doing the preparation for the meeting and then also producing the proposal book for the joint board. So I'm going to turn the page of the memo, the next page, page 2, just to highlight the authorities of the joint board, starting with the statutory authorities. At the top of that page, you'll see AS 1605-258, subsistence use and allocation of fish and game. That statute calls for both boards to identify non-subsistence areas. AS 1605-260 is the statute that authorizes the boards to establish local fish and game advisory committees and an emergency closure authority process for the advisory committees. 1605.315 is the statute for regulation or for joint board meetings. And then AS 4439.030 is a statute that requires both boards in a joint session to provide the governor with a list of qualified persons to serve as commissioner for the Department of Fish and Game. So based on those statutory authorities, the boards has has authority over 3 regulations, 3 chapters, 5 AAC chapter 96, which is primarily the advisory committee regulations, but there's also an article dealing with the adoption of fish and game regulations. Chapter 97 is the advisory committee closure process for advisory committees. And then chapter 98 deals with the subsistence uses. And then that complete list of the articles for the regulations is listed on page 8. And I'm going to flip over to page 4 of that memo and then just talk a little bit about the history of the joint board regulatory meetings. There have been meetings that are non-regulatory for that process, such as the commissioner selection process. So this is going to focus on the regulatory meetings. The memo has a table of meetings going back to 1985 from the best available information we have on record, but I'll focus on the meetings since the 2000s. There have been 3 joint board regulatory meetings for which a call for proposals was issued. There was also a one-day meeting that dealt with one regulatory proposal, but it was not this full-on process where the call was issued. And yeah, I'm not even positive if I should have looked into this, but I'm not even sure the boards took oral testimony at that meeting, but they were just addressing a single subject, a single proposal. So our most recent meeting was in March 2019. It was scheduled for a 5-day meeting. It only took 3 days, and the call for proposals was limited to the advisory, basically chapters 96 and 97 regarding the advisory committees and that process for adopting regulations. Chapter 99 related to subsistence regulations was not on the call for proposals for that meeting. The boards had 40 proposals in front of them. 22 were adopted at that meeting. And I know that Department of Fish and Game submitted a large number of proposals for that particular meeting as we were making some adjustments to the advisory committee regulations that we thought were improvements and updates from the way for the way we currently handle the advisory committees. In October 2013, there was a 5-day meeting. 41 proposals were submitted, and at that meeting, they did address the subsistence procedures, including non-subsistence areas. And then prior to that, October 2007, another 4-day regulatory meeting. 39 proposals were submitted. On their call was also the subsistence regulations. They had 39 proposals, and 2 of which were for not to change non-subsistence areas. And then I'm just going to skip to page 6 and talk a little bit about the joint board meeting budget. Point out to the committee or let you know that the March 2019 meeting, which was originally scheduled for 5 days, but was finished in 3 days, we estimate the cost of that meeting was approximately $63,000. The meeting was in Anchorage and it was held in conjunction with a Board of Game meeting. One thing I'll point out about that meeting is that we had 9 advisory committee members in attendance at that meeting and 12 board members, 2 were absent. And I also want to point out that that $63,000 is just for board support section. It's not for the entire department. And yeah, in addition to travel for advisory committee members, board support staff, we're also covering the meeting venue expense in that. So in 2013, our approximate expense for that meeting, we believe was right around $100,000. And that too was held in conjunction with we actually had a Board of Game work session at that time, as well as I know that there was a Board of Fisheries work session around that time frame too, but I know that this meeting was in conjunction with Board of Game. For that particular meeting, we had 19 AC members attend. And then the other meeting expenses were, just as mentioned for 2019, board member travel, advisory, board staff travel, and then the meeting venue. If a joint board meeting is called for 2024, well, in anticipation of that, and in anticipation that it would cover all 3 chapters of regulation under the joint board's authority, we would anticipate that being a 5-day meeting. We have requested a budget increment to help fund that meeting, a budget increment of $75,000. We know that that is part of the governor's recently released budget, and that that amount will still need to go through the legislative approval process. That's about what I wanted to cover so far, and then I turn over to Lisa. But before we do, if there are any questions I can answer.
Yeah, so this is Doug. We were able to secure in the governor's proposed budget $75,000 for this meeting as part of the governor's request. So we will be defending that throughout the process, since it is part of the governor's budget as it goes through, and hopefully that'll survive the legislative process.
Thank you, Commissioner. Did any other board members have any questions for board support? Lisa, with subsistence, would you mind covering some of the history and the authority here? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to give a little context for some of the non-subsistence area information in the memo. Beginning on page 2, you can see that the state subsistence law also has the joint boards of fisheries and game identifying those non-subsistence areas where dependence upon subsistence is not a principal characteristic of the economy, culture, and way of life. By considering these 12 factors, and they're listed there in your memo, for example, the reports for the joint boards would need to look at the extent and the kinds of employment for wages, including full-time, part-time, temporary, and seasonal. Number 8, for example, the percentage of those domiciled in the area or community participating in hunting and fishing activities or using wild fish and game. Moving to page 3, you can see one of the other factors, for example, is the geographic locations where those domiciled in the area or community hunt and fish. So there are quite a few criteria to be considered if a non-subsistence area proposal comes in. The joint boards established the current non-subsistence areas during 2 multi-day meetings in 92 and 93. So they've been in place since then. There was a detailed report, and the memo has the name of that report and links to it online for anybody to find. And it's also on the joint board website as well, this report. Now, skipping ahead 14 years, October 2007, the joint board issued a call for proposals to address potential changes to these non-subsistence areas. There were 2 proposals, one to modify the boundary of the Juneau area and one to add game management, portions of game management 13 and 20 to the non-subsistence area. Again, there was a detailed report posted online for a 4-day meeting. And at that meeting, the Department of Law advised, and you can see it here in the memo, similar to past advice they've given on proposals to modify customary and traditional use findings, the joint boards should carefully consider proposals to modify non-subsistence area regulations. The current regulations are presumed to be legally valid, and they were based on an extensive administrative record and reviewed and approved by the Department of Law. They recommended that the joint boards concentrate on any new information that's developed since the current regs were in 1993. And then most recently, the joint board review of non-subsistence areas took place in October 2013, as Christy said. There were 4 proposals: elimination of all the non-subsistence areas, 2 proposals targeted specific communities, Kodiak and Bethel, and the 4th proposal addressed the boundaries of the Fairbanks non-subsistence area. And also for this meeting, Department of Law and Fish and Game comments advised against changes to non-subsistence area boundaries, absent any information supporting such a reevaluation. So we updated the extensive data in the 1992-93 report, technical paper 386. This is 220 pages of socioeconomic data. And it pulls from data from commercial fisheries, sport fish, and wildlife division. So it's not just subsistence section data lift, it's also large data requests to those divisions as well. After several days of testimony and deliberations, the joint boards chose to make no changes to the non-subsistence areas at that time. On page 4, just to let you all know, the data sources that we pull from to look at these questions are the federal census and also the American Community Survey are some of the data sources, as well as I said, our colleagues in the other divisions. And finally, on page 6, we have a couple of suggestions for the committee to consider, seeing that there is this big data lift for the department to prepare and also for board members to read and study and understand. If the committee may want to explore alternatives for the call related to those non-subsistence areas, similar to the one for the 2007 meeting. One option could be to ask proposal submissions address some of those 12 criteria that identify the non-subsistence areas. This would help inform the people who are submitting proposals of that statutory requirement for changing the non-subsistence areas, and ask them to please explain why they think a change is warranted. Another option would be to use a vetting process, and the memo goes over one idea or way of this might work. The joint board this committee would need to figure out what information related to those 12 criteria is expected to be provided in the proposal. And then the committee would go through a review process to determine if the proposal meets that call. And we've given an example here. The boards could require proposals to provide information on at least 4 of those 12 criteria and reconvene the committee to assess the proposals that do not meet the call. From that assessment, the committee could forward to your respective boards as agenda items for each board's consideration at their earliest meetings in the next cycle. And during any board's review, any board member could request a proposal be returned to the joint boards for full consideration. And that's just all the background and context I wanted to point out for the committee's consideration. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Mrs. Olson. Do any committee members have any questions for Ms. Olson?
I see Al has his hand raised.
Mr. Member Barrett.
Thank you, Chairman, Lisa, I'm curious, do you have any history on why the legislature didn't include trapping in the 12 criteria?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. Through the chair, I don't have any of that background information in front of me, but I can look it up and see if I can find anything, get back to you if you like.
I think that would be important.
Any other committee member questions? Member Carlson Van Dort.
Hi, thank you. I think I know the answer to this, but for the 2019 meeting where there was other sort of similar proposals considered, was there any type of draft or update to technical paper 335 or 386? Or is the only one of that nature for October 2007?
There was, through the chair, Member Carlson Van Dort, yes. I think that was the only technical papers that we have are listed in the memo, I think.
Thank you.
Any other committee member questions? At this time, I'd like to open the floor for discussion amongst committee members as to which dates and the location we would like to recommend to the boards for the joint board meeting. Anybody like to kick off discussion on this?
Chair Mitchell, if it helps, I can walk through those dates shown on page 7 with regards to each board meeting, each board and what their schedules will be for 2024.
That'd be great. Thank you.
So yes, referring to page 7, during the 2023-2024 meeting cycle, the Board of Fisheries will be meeting in February 23rd through March 7th in Anchorage to cover the Upper Cook Inlet finfish regulations. And the Board of Game is expected to meet 8 days in March 2024, also to consider changes to the interior Northeast Arctic region, to that region. The Board of Game has not set those meeting dates yet, but they will at their upcoming January work session. Based on past schedules, it's usually early March when they have that meeting. I focused on March because based on the 2019 meeting, but obviously 2013 and 2007 were October meetings. So in October 2024, the Board of Fish is scheduled to hold its annual work session in Anchorage, October 29 through 30. The Board of Game is not expected to meet during that time.
Thank you for that, Chrissy. Did any committee members have any? Mr. Carpenter?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, I'm kind of looking at this as, you know, as in regards to dollars and cents. And when you look at the Board of Fisheries schedule in March of 2024, it's a pretty long meeting. It's in Anchorage. Obviously, the Board of Game meeting most likely will be in Fairbanks. And when you're talking about having to move board members from Fairbanks to Anchorage or Anchorage to Fairbanks, and combine that with staff and different people that are involved in the different meetings, it seems like that would be much more expensive. And and logistically complicated than maybe looking at the October month instead, just for the simple fact is it doesn't appear that the Board of Game is going to be meeting in October and the Board of Fisheries does. And so it's usually a shorter meeting. The schedule is not quite as compact as they are later in the spring. And so I would just look to that as a possible solution or a potential time frame that, you know, we might consider for this meeting.
Thank you, Member Carpenter. Mr. Burnett?
Yes, following on his comments, most of the Board of Game members live in the Anchorage area. And so having a meeting in Anchorage subsequent to the Board of Fish meeting before the meeting in Fairbanks that we would normally have probably wouldn't be a big expense relative to doing it a different time. I don't have a problem with October either, but if we were going to do it in March, I think either following on the Board of Fish meeting might make the most sense.
Thank you, Member Barrett, and then Carlson Van Dort.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My issue with October is the ACs. Generally, the ACs don't start meeting till October. September is, you know, the big hunting and gathering and fishing season. So even to suggest that they should meet earlier may be cumbersome for a lot of ACs as they're out gathering for their winter goods.
Chair. You might have been on mute, Chair Mitchell. It looked like maybe you said something, but we couldn't hear you.
Member Carlson Van Dort, I see you have your hand raised there.
Thanks. Appreciate that. So I would really not advocate for coming on the tail end of a 2+ week meeting in Anchorage in 2024, especially Upper Cook Inlet. We did a 4-week long marathon, and it was really, really tough to keep people focused in that amount of time. Plus, being away from day jobs is really challenging for that amount of time. So I would tend to lean towards October, although I also share some of the concerns that Member Barrett did with respect to the AC schedule. So my question is aside from budget, I do notice that on the table that you listed, there was some April opportunities. Is there another consideration besides budget that would steer us away from April? And then with respect to location, I think, you know, Anchorage obviously is most central. However, I think there should become some sort of consideration for where the proposals, if any, come from. I know that, for example, we had some mention of subsistence area issues in our Southeast meeting that we had last spring. And, you know, I don't know if there's any way to make the determination on location based on where we receive proposals from. You know, if we don't have any, you know, Southeast related proposals, then I think that makes it makes a little more sense to focus on interior Anchorage and vice versa if there's no interior or Western Alaska specific proposals. I'm just kind of curious if there's any consideration of where the call is coming from.
Through the chair. Oh. Would you like me to address? I can try to address those comments. Thank you, Member Carlson Van Dort. With regards to April, I might lean on Shalene Hutter a little bit on this, but I know that there's a timeline for filing regulations, but I know that the concern with that has been specific to the Board of Game and the Board of Fisheries. And so since this would cover non-subsistence areas and advisory committee regulations, I don't know that there's really that time constraint for having a meeting in April as opposed to March. With regards to location, the considerations are budget because, and even for having a meeting in April, it's budget, but I know you said, but aside from budget. So then we'd be bringing everybody together at a special meeting in April, or not a joint board meeting in April, not in conjunction with the regular board meeting. So a little bit more expense there. With location, I think that once we get out of Anchorage with regards to rooms and airfare, then the cost just grows. But otherwise, we've not considered other locations for the joint board meeting.
Thank you for that. Any other member comments or discussion?
I want to echo that. Mar's concern. I would rather not have that meeting tapped onto a 2-week meeting. That's just a burnout for everybody, and my staff will, certain members will have to participate in that and that just comes almost to 3 weeks, and that's just too long.
Chair Mitchell, it might help if I clarify the thought of having it in March. And I'm not a strong proponent of either, but the thought was that it would be the Board of Fish Upper Cook Inlet meeting first, followed by the Board of Game Interior Region meeting. They tend not to overlap, or at least not overlap by very much. So the Board of Fish meeting would be over. The Board of Game meeting would then wrap up their regional meeting, likely in Fairbanks, because that's where they've always had those meetings. And then on their return from Fairbanks, we would lay them over in Anchorage and then start the joint board meeting. That gives a little bit of a window for Board of Fisheries members to recover from that or rest up from that Upper Cook Inlet meeting. So I just throw that out there so the members are aware of the timing there.
Great, thank you for that, Christy. I guess I have a follow-up question with that. And the way that you just described it, does that seem to be a little bit more cost effective than holding it in October?
Not necessarily, because in October we would be planning to, if the committee agrees and the boards agree, piggyback onto that Board of Fish work session. So then we're saving. It's a little more cost efficient for that meeting as well, because Board of Fish members are already in Anchorage for that meeting.
Thank you. Member Carlson Van Dort.
Thank you. Yeah, I think if I think it makes the most sense to try and hold this in the spring, especially if there's a significant subsistence component. I mean, that is prime time subsistence gathering for fish and game and berries and all the things in October. And I think that, not knowing when the Board of Game is going to set their March meeting, I would request, if we look at March, that we have at least a minimum of 7 to 10 days minimum, 10 being better than 7 in between those meetings for breathing space. So, I think it's good that the Board of Game hasn't quite set their dates yet, because maybe they can accommodate that for March. But that would be my request.
Thank you, Member Carlson Van Dort. I guess I'll put some comments on the record right now as well. I too think that October is a pretty important month for fishing and hunting opportunities for user groups. And so while I understand there's some challenges related to having this meeting in March right after a long fisheries meeting, I guess I'm preferential to the March period. And then looking at this meeting's typically always been held in Anchorage, other than I think I saw two times it was held in Juneau. I'd be in support of having it in Anchorage in March. So I'll just put that there. Any other committee members have anything to add? Oh, Member Carlson Van Dort.
Yeah, thanks. So with respect to budget, like I am very sensitive to the department's budget constraints, and I appreciate the fact that that was included in the governor's budget. On the other hand, this is not a meeting that occurs very frequently. And this is one opportunity that both of these bodies meet together to consider some pretty important stuff. So I think that that needs to be top of mind in sensitive to the budget issues, but really it needs to be what works best for the public and the membership in terms of where and when. Sorry, Doug.
Thank you. Member
Maybe
Barrett.
I'll just put in the budget a request for a currency printing machine. We'll work with whatever happens. So.
Thank you, Commissioner. Member Barrett, did I see you had your hand raised?
I answered my own question. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Okay, we need a motion or additional discussion. Member Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, I think I will obviously do what's at the will of the rest of the committee here, but and I do agree that some of the concerns regarding October that Mr. Barrett mentioned are valid in regards to AC and the main part of the hunting and fishing season. I guess my question is, before I was to make a motion or somebody else was to make a motion, is do the members of the Board of Game think that this is going to be something that the board will, if we were to pick a time frame based around travel after a Board of Game meeting, is that something that the Board of Game is most likely to support? Because I think that's really important before we make a motion.
Thank you. Member Burnett, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, in response to Member Carpenter's question there, I think the Board of Game would be very sensitive to making sure that this works. And I'm speaking for myself or from myself, but we have two other board members here. The board has been very good working with Christy on making things work well for everybody involved. So I think that's a very doable thing. But I have a question for you, and that is, what's the date of the fisheries meeting that it will be completed? So when we're considering when the Board of Game meeting and then this one will follow on. You know what date you expect the Board of Fish meeting to conclude in March?
Yeah.
Madam Chair, the Upper Cook Inlet meeting in Anchorage is scheduled for February 23 through March 7.
So then that would give us much of March that we could work with and still have this in the March timeframe. Thank you.
Member Carlson Van Dort.
Thanks. It's so much easier just to raise my hand than to try and find the little hand raise thing. Thank you. So I have one quick question is, when we're having this discussion, maybe this is a separate topic, but do we need to talk about requiring the criteria being addressed in any proposals for this call? Is that a separate motion, or is that already in there?
I think right now we're just going to discuss the dates and the location, and then coming up next on the agenda, we'll talk about the call of proposals.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Member Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I see that somebody else has a hand up, so I can wait before I make a motion. I'm looking at this and like Mr. Nelson stated, that the Board of Fish meeting will be over on March 7th. Assuming that the Board of Game is going to be try and work their schedule in March 2024, making possibly a similar time frame for their meeting in Fairbanks. I think that it's important, as the commissioner said, to have a 10 or 2-week window of opportunity after that long board meeting to kind of recuperate a little bit and have us time to, deal with these proposals that are going to come before the joint board. So I was thinking a 3-day meeting, and I was thinking sometime, in the vicinity of, March 19th through 22nd. Just as I guess just to bring up as a suggestion, and if there's no opposition to that, I'll surely put that in the form of a motion, but that's just my suggestion for right now.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mr. Carpenter. I think the Board of Game has yet to establish the dates for their meeting. And so correct me if I'm wrong, board support, but we would kind of be tentatively saying March when it would work based on when the Board of Game would set their meeting.
That is correct.
Thank you. Member Carlson Van Dort and then Mr. Barrett.
Yeah, if it's going to be in Anchorage, I would just make sure that y'all are thinking about Ferrandi and Iditarod and venues and hotels and all the things around that time.
Thank you.
Member Barrett.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So, speaking to the other Board of Game members, we would potentially then have to have our meeting, our March meeting end before the 19th of March, or do you want to have it after the 21st of March? And then if it's after the 21st of March, do we still have enough time for the regulation packet to get signed by the Lieutenant Governor?
Through the chair, I may be able to help with answering that question. So I'll be presenting options for the Board of Game in January and trying to avoid the overlap with the Board of Fish Upper Cook Inlet meeting. And given that the Board of Game always starts their regulatory meeting on a Friday, the options before the Board of Game will be to start that meeting Friday, March 8th. It's approximately an 8-day meeting. So we'd be going through the following week, the 8th through the 14th, about that time frame. Alternatively, and it gets a little late, but March 15th is the next Friday, and then we'd be going into the week of the 21st. So yeah, it just kind of depends what schedule the Board of Game sets for that meeting, then when that joint board could happen. And if it's later, if the Board of Game goes with that later option of the 15th through the 20th or 21st, and then we're looking, more like the 23rd, 24th or something or 25th for a joint board meeting. I didn't give Shalene a heads up I might be calling on her. I don't know that I do not know that changes to advisory committee or non-subsistence related regulations have to be effective July 1, like they do for Board of Game and Board of Fisheries. I think we have some room there, but that is not a question I found the answer to before this committee meeting.
Hi there, can you all hear me? I'm not aware of anything like that in the fisheries regulations that have that July 1 specific date. But since we are talking about effective dates, one thing I might want to mention is we're kind of at our limit with this Upper Cook Inlet and getting them in time for the season. And if there's going to be this meeting as well, then that will very likely delay the effective date of when the Upper Cook Inlet regs would be passed, just because of staff time and things like that.
Thank you for that, Shalene. Additional committee member discussion? Okay, we need either a motion to move forward, or is there any objection to holding the meeting in March in Anchorage? Member Barrett.
Yeah, I have no objection to holding a meeting in March. I was just looking at the dates. I was looking at potentially maybe the 24th to the 26th then.
Okay. For clarifying purposes, do we have, I'm seeing no objection to our recommendation forward being that this meeting will be held in March in Anchorage at some time in 2024. Is that sufficient for the board record there, Christy?
Well, I do have a comment about that, but I see that Jerry has, or Member Burnett has his hand up. Maybe we could go to him first.
Member Burnett?
The only modification I would suggest is that we suggest that it be scheduled after the Board of Game meeting, which the interior Arctic Board of Game meeting, which we expect to be in Fairbanks in March, but so at the end of that, and we can schedule, you know, we don't know exactly what the date of that is, but with that added to what you said, I have no objection to this.
Okay, thank you.
But
so, Madam Chair, if I could real quick, I think it would be good to set a date. The problem is that we need to secure office space. I mean, space for hotel and all these things. And the date in March doesn't let us proceed with securing space and at that stuff. And I know the Board of Game hasn't set their schedule yet, but if you set this one, then at some point in time, they're going to have to set a schedule around it. So I would at least set some tentative dates that allow us to begin working on getting the hotel space secured and a variety of other things.
Thank you, Commissioner. Member Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I make a motion that the joint board hold a meeting in Anchorage, March 2024, from March 25th through March 28th, tentatively, based on the determination of when the Board of Game meeting is going to be.
Second.
And I have a second.
Yeah, second. Al Barrett.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson.
Would you like me to call the roll?
Please call the roll.
Yeah, sure.
May I jump in there before you do? Chairman Mitchell, I apologize for that. I do have a little concern about it being a 3-day meeting. If the call is going to be open to all of the regulations, I don't know if maybe we could have some flexibility with that. A 3 to 5 day meeting, or we could have that discussion in front of each board too, after this subcommittee, the staff can speak to it. And maybe it just depends on the number of proposals we receive too, that if we start with a 4 or 5 day meeting, then, and there's not many proposals, then maybe we'll realize, it can be decided that it's a 3-day would be sufficient.
Thank you for that, Christy. Member Carpenter, do you want to speak to that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Tibbles, for that. I would surely modify my motion to make the dates the 25th through the 29th. And if the proposals come in and there's very few and there's, we can always shorten the meeting like they did several years back. So if the second will agree to that, I'm fine with that.
The second concurs, Madam Chair.
Mr. Nelson, please call the roll.
On tentative dates, March 25 through 29, 2024 in Anchorage. Burnett.
Yes.
Barrett.
Yes.
Keogh.
Yes.
Carlson Van Dort.
Yes.
Carpenter.
Yes.
Mitchell.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. At this time, we can open up conversation amongst committee members to discuss the call for proposals. As we read in our memo, there was some comments there about potentially having some sort of vetting process or including the 12 criteria within that call for proposals, and I'll open it up for committee members to discuss that. Member Carlson Van Dort.
All right, I'll kick it off. So I think it's wholly appropriate, especially considering budget, among other things, that that proposers tie their proposed changes to the regulations to the criteria in the joint board's findings. The question is how many of the criteria should they be addressing? In my mind, I think there was some reference to 4 in the memo, but maybe staff could refresh our memories. But those are my initial thoughts on it. I think it's appropriate so that we're not wasting time evaluating as prior joint boards have proposals that don't meet any of the criteria.
Thank you, Member Carlson Van Dort. I'll echo some of your comments. I also think that it's appropriate. I think it's a little bit of a time saver. I think it's important to understand the criteria as a proposer for what you're submitting, and understanding, and providing some explanation for why you're submitting the proposals that you are, and an understanding of, what the criteria, which is going to be that the board will deliberate on based on the criteria that we have. And I see Member Barrett's hand is up, so Member Barrett.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. My concern with putting that somewhat of a burden on the public is the lack of information that's available to the persons or the ACs proposing. Since there's been no household surveys done in the non-subsistence areas for a very long time, and so there's limited resources to justify, besides anecdotally, or maybe through some census information, that's a kind of a high hurdle in some cases.
Thank you, Member Barrett. Additional, Ms. Olson, I see that you came on. Do you have something to speak to?
Madam Chair, would you like me to help clarify that a little?
Please.
Sure. Yep, we subsistence section has not surveyed specifically within the boundaries of a non-subsistence area, but that being said, there are a lot of data, economic and socioeconomic data available for the current non-subsistence areas. There are also a lot of harvest information. The majority of people who live in the non-subsistence areas do get permits and do punch their harvest tickets, and that's one source of information. The majority of people who live in the areas also buy hunting, fishing, and trapping licenses. So there's a lot of information from that. There's a lot of personal use permit data for the non-subsistence areas. So it is quite a data-rich environment, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Olson. Additional board conversation. I guess in response to Member Barrett's comments, we have 12 criteria here, and not all of which are completely dependent on data, and having a set number of criteria at which the proposer would need to look through, whether that be 4, as in the memo stated. A handful of those I think is appropriate, just as education for the proposer, as well as this criteria is something that we use, and it provides an opportunity to kind of vet these proposals before they come before the board. Member Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe a question for Christy or Art, but if we used the basis of the call for proposals from 2019. There was a memo that listed all what the call for proposals look like. Can we just kind of give you direction to include something in there about utilizing these 12 criteria if you're going to submit a proposal based on, or do you need something very specific from the board in regards to that?
Through the chair, Member Carpenter, you can the committee and then the board, whichever board calls the meeting, can give us direction about the call for proposals with regards to like encouraging proposals or asking proposals to address the criteria. That would work for board support section. But if it's a requirement that proposals address the criteria or a number of criteria, then what we would need help with is how do I don't know that it's appropriate that staff make that determination. That might be something that the committee wants to reconvene to review those proposals and decide that they've met that criteria or not. So if that helps, there's an option that you require submitters to address the criteria, or if you're encouraging them, we can certainly put that on the call that submitters of proposals for changing non-subsistence areas should address the criteria or a number of the criteria. Yeah, don't know if I hope that helps.
I think it helps. I don't know that we need to make this any more complicated than it is. I think there's been a long history of call for proposals from the executive directors in regards to what's going to come before the joint board. So in my opinion, just utilizing those slate of existing materials that we have, including something in there that all proposals that are going to address non-subsistence areas or changes to non-subsistence areas include as many of the 12 characteristics in AS 1605-258 as possible. And then if the committee wants to get back and review those prior to them being put in the booklet, then I think that's adequate. But that's my suggestion.
Thank you. Member Carlson Van Dort.
Yeah, I think that addresses, I think, my concern too. I don't know that I necessarily need it to be a requirement. But I do think it needs to be listed in there somewhere. And I'm thinking like on ACR, for example, emergency petition type forms where you're like, you have to kind of meet the ACR criteria or explain how you think your proposal meets some of that criteria. I think as long as it's somewhat addressed in the proposal, I'm comfortable with that. But the point is that you can get some pretty off the wall stuff that isn't tied to anything. And certainly we don't want to be spinning our wheels on those types of proposals. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Carlson Van Dort. I tend to agree with Member Carpenter and Member Carlson Van Dort's comments on that. I think that having it kind of listed and supplied, that information supplied to the proposer when they go to write their proposal is important and sufficient in providing that level of education, and then also a little bit of a vetting process. Additional committee member comments? Member Burnett.
Yeah, I want to just say that I agree with you so that you have someone from the Board of Game that's agreeing with you. That we do want to have those criteria listed and people knowing that they should address them in some manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Burnett. Not seeing any additional discussion here. Is there any objection to the joint board's recommendation being that we would like to have the 12 socioeconomic characteristics kind of laid out on the proposal application or submission paperwork to inform the public of the criteria at which we look through these proposals through, and also to serve as a little bit of a vetting process. Not seeing anything. Member,
Does that, I mean, is that a departure from the way it's done? Does that require a motion, or staff? What do you think?
Through the chair, are you asking for this committee to make the motion and make that clear?
No,
or is
I'm
your committee
asking
the-
whether, no, I'm asking whether or not that's a departure from the way it's currently done in a way that would require a motion from this body to make that recommendation.
I can't say for sure, because the last time that this happened was in 2018. I know that it was a recommendation from the committee to the board at that time to that, in 2019, they didn't have the subsistence regulations on that call for proposals. So the time prior to that was 2013, the planning process in 2012. They did not do any kind of vetting process. The call for proposals doesn't even reference the 12 criteria. So then we'd be going back to the 2007 meeting when the call for proposal was issued in 2006, I think. And at that point, they did specify the need for proposals to address the 12 criteria.
Okay. Well, if there's no other comments, it looks like you got one. I'm happy to make a motion.
I think I see Member Barrett's hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I was agreeing with Christie. I believe in the early 2000s when we went through non-subsistence areas, when we were filling out our proposal applications, it asked you to address your concern, what needed to be changed and why. So you had to base it off one of the 12 criteria. I wrote a couple of them.
Okay. Well, then, I mean, with that, if it's helpful, I would move that that we recommend to the joint board that that the proposal submission form include the 12 socioeconomic criteria and request proposals address some or all or some of those criteria. Thanks.
I'll second.
Mr. Nelson, please call the roll.
Sorry, who was the second?
I believe it was
Mr. Burnett.
Thank you. Okay, on the motion that the proposal form should encourage some or all of the 12 criteria to be addressed. Keough.
Yes.
Burnett.
Yes.
Barrett.
Yes.
Mitchell.
Yes.
Carpenter.
Yes.
Carlson Van Dort.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you very much. Christy and Art, I understand you'll be preparing and submitting a memo then to the boards to relay the committee's action for these recommendations.
That is correct. And both boards meet in January. The Board of Fisheries AYK meeting begins January 14th, I believe. Board of Game meets January 19th. So that is an opportunity for each board to discuss the committee, hear the committee report and discuss a future joint board meeting if they want to add that to those January agendas. But we will have a memo prepared for those meetings, and that each board, the committee members can speak to it before the full board.
Great, thank you very much. Was there any additional miscellaneous business for this meeting, board support?
Not that I'm aware of, Chair Mitchell.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'd like to say thank you all for taking the time to be here today. And I'll adjourn this meeting. The time is 3:11. Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Merry
Thank
Christmas.
you. Merry Christmas.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all for
Merry
your time.
Christmas. Thank you, Michelle.
Merry Christmas.
Bye-bye.
We'll be looking for you in IT there, Commissioner.